Hey everybody, this is Cameron from Obnoxious and Anonymous. Today I am going to be reviewing four of the chapters out of Mark Frost's book, The Final Dossier. The chapters we're covering tonight are The Double R Diner, Annie Blackburn, Windom Earle, and Back in Twin Peaks. The reason why is because those four chapters kind of blend into each other and kind of creates sort of a mini arc in the middle of the book itself. Joining me tonight is Mandy. How's it going?
Good, how are you?
Doing great. It's wonderful to have you back
Yeah.
discussing this pretty awesome book.
Yeah, I'm excited.
There has been a tremendous amount of attention on this book. If you type in the Twin Peaks in Google right now, tons and tons of reviews are coming in for this book, and people, for the most part, are very, very happy. I've only seen a few people say that it's all right, but for the most part, people are extremely enthusiastic about it. Some so that are saying that they like this book more than season three.
I can see that because again, I've said before, this book is seemingly just full fan service. All the things that we wanted to know, the people that we wanted to know about, it's right here. So,
It's fan service, but it's not fan service because yes, it's telling us about people we wanted to know about, but it's not giving people entirely what they wanted to see with those characters. I
yeah,
don't think a lot of people wanted that for Donna Hayward. I mean, it makes sense, like I've said, but I think some people wanted, happier endings for people, and or at least up until season three. And it seems like the only person that has sort of any sort of happiness towards the end of a chapter is Shelley.
yeah, yeah,
Everybody else is in a mental institution, a psychiatric ward, or
yeah,
home facility, hospital. I don't know. It's ridiculous, but
yeah.
that's just the world of Twin Peaks. Apparently, when the doppelganger got out, all hell broke loose, and everyone went mad.
Yes, exactly.
All right, so these four chapters. Usually, I've been doing sort of a video for each chapter, but these four kind of, well, they do. They basically all go together because it's the only times where certain characters are mentioned, and there is a complete arc from the beginning of one to the end of the fourth chapter that we're going to be discussing tonight. So that's why we're doing four in a row. Okay, your overall impressions of these four chapters before we dive in.
Um,
Dealing with Norma, her mom, Annie, and Wyndham, and all that. I mean, were you happy with this chunk of the book?
yeah, well, not so much the double R stuff. The Norma,
We'll get into
um,
that, but
yeah, the Norma story I didn't really care for just because um
well,
I don't know.
we'll get into
I just,
specifics.
yeah, I just, it's, it's, it's 80% great. Say that. So, and I have to sit with it again. Like this is one that you're going to have to sit with for a bit to really, um, you know, read a few times to get the pictures in your head of what's happening and stuff. So,
Well, it's a bit complex at start,
mhm.
and we'll get into that. I don't want to say the word convoluted,
Mhm.
but much like Shelley dating Bobby prior to Laura Palmer, there's a little bit of rewiring that has to go in your head
Yeah.
dealing with Norma's mother and in the show versus now what we get in the book. To me,
That's right. Yeah. Yeah.
what's in the book makes sense, but my goodness, do you have to rethink a bunch of things. And once you rethink it, you go, okay, I can see how this makes sense.
Mhm.
But that's not at all the way um it's weird. It's not played that way in the show at all. And
No.
and yet knowing this information, there's nothing in the show that negates what's in the book.
No. It is. It's crafty,
Mm-hmm.
but I would have been okay learning about this story in the show, but it was hard to read it at first because it's like, well, no, that's Vivian. Vivian's her mom. What's happening here? And Ernie doesn't come around till then, and they just recently got married. And
well, we knew that. I mean, we know that in the show that Ernie and her get together relatively early.
But the book plays it differently.
Really?
The timeline of Ernie and Vivian, from what I remember, I only read it once.
Well, we're going to go through it. We're going to go through it. I'm much more concerned by other discrepancies we have in this section, which seems to be something that Mark Frost likes to revel in. I mean, now we have 2 books that are full of discrepancies. So I think it's pretty fair to say that Mark Frost either doesn't remember certain things, which I don't want to believe, or he's just having a field day making the fans think of like, is this true? Is this not true? Is this restructured time history? You know, that type of thing. Of course, there's no answers, but
yeah.
Anyway, all right, well, let's get started here. We're going to start with the double R. Case number, of course, ends with 119, which I absolutely adore that all the chapters are case numbers 119. All right, so the book begins, or not the book, I'm sorry, this chapter begins basically talking about Norma Jennings' father named Marty, who is the owner and founder of the Double R Diner, and Norma's mother, Ilsa, who apparently left the diner to care for her father when he was diagnosed with heart disease. However, it turns out that while Marty had heart disease, he also was dating a woman named Vivian that was running a motel for him. And so obviously her Ilsa, Norma's mother, actual mother, got wind of this, and it says, what, she divorced him? No, she didn't divorce him.
No, I think he left.
Right, he left, but they didn't. I don't think she allowed the divorce, which made Vivian angry. But Norma, after Norma's dad died, and I'm sorry, I'm just blanking because there's so much here. Norma's dad died, but first he had a child with Vivian named Annie.
Mm-hmm.
And she was born in 1973, which is unbelievable because that puts her at 17 years old when she meets Cooper.
Right. Yeah.
However, it later says in the book that Annie was in her mid-20s when she met Cooper. So who knows? She certainly was not 17. I'll tell you that much. But anyway, they have her birthday in 1973. Yeah. So when Norma's father died, Annie was 12 years old. And then when Norma's mom died, she inherited the diner herself, which is another reason why Vivian was kind of about the diner when she came to review it as MT Wentz.
Yeah.
All right. But it said that Annie and Norma got along, her being her half sister and all that. Now, in the show itself, did you ever question Norma and Annie's sisterhood versus their last names? Obviously, we had Hank Jennings being married to Norma, so that means Norma Jennings. But were we to assume that Norma's maiden name was Blackburn?
I don't think in 25 years I've actually ever thought about what Norma's maiden name was. Ever. So yeah, I mean, why would we think differently?
I guess I just assumed that Annie was, because I knew Norma was older.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe, more older than maybe the space between two sisters usually are.
Mm-hmm.
But, there's some families where like someone's 22, 23 and their parents have another kid, so.
Yeah. Sure.
So it's entirely possible. So that's how I always assumed that Annie was like really young when, Norma was probably 18, 19, 20.
Yeah.
That's how I
Mm-hmm.
always took it.
Mm-hmm.
But this book, kind of plays it out differently, saying that, obviously that they bonded over this. And Vivian, she was just, marrying all types of guys, but she
Well,
married,
and
she married a
sorry.
guy named Roland Blackburn,
Mm-hmm.
who adopted Annie. And that's how obviously Annie got her last name. Now, what were we going to say?
Just that. I just got to that part in the book.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. It says, for many years, Norman declined to share the secret of having Annie in her life to Hank or Big Ed Hurley. It says Norma kept this connection with Annie alive, and in order to help herself cope, she went to extraordinary efforts to maintain a civil relationship with Vivian, the woman who had played such a callous, unfeeling role in the destruction of her own family. Okay, so then why? See, when Norma says to Annie, "How is mom?" It's like I understand she wants to be nice for the family, but she really plays up Vivian as if she is her mother,
Yeah.
not stepmom that she hates, the step monster, right?
Yeah.
Um,
That's what's interesting about this whole story is that why, we've already got something on film that's seems pretty concrete. So why would you change it so drastically
well, it's weird
for
because
this?
their performances work the way we initially interpreted the material. They can work in the interpretation of this material with it, but Norma seems so hurt by this whole MT Wentz thing and all that. And she confronts her as a daughter to a mother and not as, well, you know what? You've always been this mean to me. You stole my dad away from my mom. She doesn't bring any of that stuff up
Yeah.
to Vivian.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, obviously that must mean Norma's really mature, but I also think that this is revisionist history here.
Yeah.
I don't think that this was the initial backstory of Norma and her mom when they sat down to write the Vivian Ernie Niles part in the series.
Mm-hmm.
Because otherwise I think they would have touched on a little bit of this.
Mm-hmm.
But,
Yeah.
I mean, I understand Norma saying to Annie, well, how is mom? And, Annie's like, I vote for plan B, we could talk about her, feel good about things. I vote for plan B.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, what's your take on all this?
My take is just that it's I feel that this story in the book is almost unnecessary because they've completely rewritten the history of someone that we've known for so long. And really, when you do watch the show, they've her and Vivian play so well off each other that you really do buy their story that they're mother and daughter. So
I don't think you question it once that it's the stepmother coming in with her third husband to the diner. I think you get the
no,
feeling that it's her mom who's just
absolutely. Yeah.
randomly married Ernie Niles.
Yeah. So I don't understand why he would have rewritten this history for this book. I don't understand how it ties into, or why it could have been left out. I don't know.
It doesn't bother me, but I have to say, I mean, just the way I became tongue tied even discussing this at the beginning of this video, it's very complex to the point where it's you have to shift a lot in your head over something that is honestly a little trivial. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot of mental games you're playing with yourself to rewrite and place things in different contexts. When ultimately it's about Vivian and Ernie Niles.
It's not necessary. There's so much more that they could have written about, or written a longer, more in-depth story about Annie herself, or anybody else in here too. It just these seem like odd characters to bring out in this book.
Well, I think the ultimate attempt here is to give the Annie Blackburn character some background as to where she came from. So it says, Vivian moved out of the motel and moved into Roland Blackburn's estate with her daughter. And then Roland Blackburn adopted Annie. And then it says a few days later, they shipped her off to a Catholic boarding school. Okay. Mm-hmm. Annie, no one came to visit Annie that entire year except Norma. That seems to be a theme in this 4 chapters, that Norma is pretty much always there for Annie, which is good. Mm-hmm. It says that Annie was stabilized. Her grades were close to top of her class. All right. Then it takes a turn for the worse. And it says 3 years later, in her senior year, something happened after a holiday party one night between Annie and her stepfather, Roland Blackburn. Details are hazy, but my reading is this: most likely an attempted sexual assault after a night of drinking. Vivian discovered this situation. Roland ran out of the house, jumped in his car, and drove it off a bridge. Some people obviously are suggesting suicide. Some people are saying, no, the brakes were tampered with. But they brought up the brakes being tampered with as a way of collecting on his insurance, it seems like. And then later that night, Annie tries to commit suicide. Says downs a bottle of tranquilizers and slits her wrist with a box cutter. Discovered by her mother, she was rushed to a local hospital. They pumped her stomach. They saved her life. Annie remained unresponsive and borderline catatonic after the incident, and doctors soon diagnosed her as having suffered a disabling nervous breakdown. Okay, now here's another bit of rewriting history. Where am I going with this, Mandy?
Maybe you're going that in the show it was implied or even said that it was a boyfriend and not her stepfather. Okay. Who then promptly committed suicide.
All right, so let's play devil's advocate here.
Okay.
She tells Cooper it happened because of a boy, as a way of not scaring him off, because she says, do you mind if we don't talk about it? I mean, so there's a wide gap that you could put in whatever you wanted.
Sure.
But this is an extremely intense situation to just be like, do you mind if we just don't talk about it? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We're now getting into Leland Laura territory here.
Yeah. Yeah.
And if Annie went through this kind of intensity with a stepfather, and then she goes to the hospital, goes into a convent, comes to Twin Peaks, gets with Cooper, who just investigated a murder that is based off a dad having his way with his daughter and killing her. I know Cooper's a good guy, but I don't think Norma would have encouraged this.
That's very true, actually. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah. This whole story, it's really just coming out of nowhere,
It throws me because it's just it doesn't it doesn't quite match up with what Annie says. It doesn't not match up with what she says, but it definitely, look, it just seemed like to me, I'm not saying this is what I think, but this is what it seemed like initially when you first watched the show, that she had a boyfriend, some stuff went down, whatever, and she tried to take her own life, and she's embarrassed by that whole situation.
Yeah.
This is like, I'm surprised she didn't jump off the bridge too. I mean, it's so melodramatic. It's so like huge and operatic and epic. And Annie is a character I love. This situation though, I don't know. When you see her in the show, you almost think she's still kind of, even though she's been through hard times, she still seems like someone who has not gone through this much hard times.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense?
Absolutely. And I think too, like, um, you think back to like how she dresses and the fact that she went into a convent and stuff. That to me always seemed like she felt bad for what had happened. Like she went too far with a boyfriend and or compromised herself and didn't mean to. Then he dumped her and stuff, and she didn't know how to deal with it. So she, goes into the convent, which is obviously very extreme. And then when she comes back, she's always wearing the button up shirts, long sleeves, long skirts, and all that, kind of like like an Amish or Mennonite type of dress. So it implied that she messed around with a boyfriend. She messed up with a boyfriend. He broke up with her. She couldn't deal with it. And then that's the
Okay,
punishment she gave
so
herself.
take it the other way. Let's apply this history. Does this history make sense with her dressing and all that? I think it still does.
It could, yeah. But I don't know. I don't think that anybody would be like, oh yeah, it's about a boy. I don't want to talk about it. When it's your stepfather who's done something horrible and then proceeded to kill himself.
Right. Now listen, I could say I could make the case that maybe if the stepfather just abused her, assaulted her and then she just went on her life, like, okay, I can see that. But the fact that he just got in his car and drove off a bridge kind of, it takes it to another level.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I mean, it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense, but it does, but it doesn't. I mean, it's like I said, with the Vivian thing, it's I don't know, it seems like revisionist history.
Like this story that we have here, if we just look at this story, it's a very decent story. It can be interesting. There's a decent amount of development. It's totally fine, but we already have a story. So when we get this as well, like you said, like it's conflicting and a little bit confusing. So um,
The problem is though, is it does work, but
yes,
it also doesn't work, but it does work. So that's where the conflict is. It's not like,
yeah,
well, this just completely doesn't work and you can kind of write that off. No, it does work. It's just it causes a lot of brain power for something that was pretty much, there as it is. Anyway, we lost Mandy for a second. She'll be back, I'm sure. But let me continue on. That's the pleasure of live video, guys. All right. So it says, acting on doctor's recommendations, Vivian arranged for Annie to be treated and confined in the psychiatric hospital in Western Washington. So yeah, here's another woman of Twin Peaks going to the hospital.
gee, that place,
Right. All right. So it says during these months, and of course Norma went to visit Annie all the time, but that's when Vivian became romantically entangled with Ernie Niles.
The shady drifter named Ernie Niles.
Right. And then it says, when Annie was finally released from the hospital, she returned home to find that Ernie Niles had in every way taken Roland's place. That sounds fun. So, but it does say that Niles was nothing like the predator that Blackburn had been. And by all accounts, he treated Annie with far more kindness than her mother ever did. So Annie returns to Catholic school. And then she graduates, but she doesn't want to go to college, so she just throws herself into the convent next door. Norma did not initially approve of this decision, but she didn't intervene. She trusted that Annie would come to this conclusion herself, which she did. It then says, a few years down the road, as Norma suspected might happen, Annie's growing second thoughts about committing the rest of her life to the church led her to depart the convent. And then it says, now in her early 20s and much stronger emotionally and mentally than she had been in a decade, Annie, at Norma's invitation, moved to Twin Peaks to be closer to her sister and basically work at the Double R as a waitress. So it says right here, she moves to Twin Peaks in her early 20s.
Mm-hmm.
It also says that she was born in 1973. And we know that she met Dale in 1989, which makes her 16 at the time that she's with Dale Cooper.
Yeah. And going back to Vivian and Niles, they got married the next spring. Annie graduated. A few years later, Annie moves to Twin Peaks. But during that time, Vivian shows up to Twin Peaks and says, "This is my new husband, Ernie, who I just married like 3 weeks ago."
You are right.
Where by this, they've already been married for like 4 or 5 years.
Okay, well, even if we are dealing with different timelines because of what Cooper did at the end of this series, isn't it strange that Mark Frost himself is contradicting himself in its own chapter?
I mean,
what is going on here? I mean, seriously,
did he watch the show? Did they watch the show?
He says he did.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, but listen, there's a difference between watching the show and like studying the show.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if he just kind of watched it, got kind of the basis, and then just took it in a new direction.
Well, yeah, he could have had the volume off and been like, "Oh, there's Vivian and Ernie. I'm going to jot this down." You know.
Here's the thing, though. Mark Frost is an incredibly smart, intelligent man. He knows what he's doing. I'm just saying this. What is the purpose of all of this? Why can't we just get an official history? Why are we... listen, I get the idea that like there's, alternate timelines happening or, a different reality happening. I get that. But it's in its own chapter doing this.
Yeah.
And I understand it keeps the reader on its toes. I'm very happy about that. However, it's a lot of thinking about trivial things.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm asking, why do you think he's going to this trouble to do this? If you believe he's doing this on purpose. I know a lot of people believe the opposite, that he's just kind of, doing what Lynch does, which is, continuity, schmontinuity. I'm just going to do what I want to do. But then why say born in 73 when we know it takes place in 89? Why is Donna Hayward going to college in 1992 as an 18-year-old when she's 18 in 1989?
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little confused at this moment in time, and that's why these videos are kind of initial reaction videos, because I really don't know how to react at this moment.
Yeah.
I like the overall story I'm being told.
Yes.
I'm just confused by a little of these details that are perplexing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because we're not walking into these books as fresh-faced Twin Peaks fans that are just like, "Oh, this looks interesting." I mean, we have studied this. We've had this in our brains for a very, very long time. We know this. Why do I remember in a TV show that some random third-party character shows up and says, "This is my new husband that we just married 3 weeks ago"? That's not information I need to carry with me for, 25 years, but I do. And then this book comes around and it's like, it's just very different. So I don't know. It's good. Like I said, I like the story that's in here, but we already know the other story and they're conflicting. So.
Right. So the book goes on to basically tell the story that we all know from the series itself, with Vivian and Ernie coming to town, Ernie getting together with Hank, the whole One-Eyed Jacks thing happening, Dead Dog Farm.
Mm-hmm.
It says that when Ernie returns home, that Vivian has like all his luggage and, clothes and everything else out on the front lawn, which obviously makes sense. And that's pretty much it for this chapter. I do like the fact that Tamara says at the end, my anger persists here because of the damage done to Vivian's daughters, one more than the other. For Annie Blackburn's fate, Vivian deserves a special place in hell. And if she didn't suffer it here, I hope she's found it in whatever existence awaits beyond. Wow, that's pretty dark.
Yeah, it's pretty harsh.
For all the other, characters, that have done terrible things, she seems to be very upset at Vivian. So maybe she has problems with her own stepmom. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyway, let's move on here. The next chapter, that's only basically a page long, is Annie Blackburn. And this basically says that, she started a relationship with Dale Cooper. And this is really interesting here. Because she brings Windom Earle and his wife Caroline and says there's a long chain of circumstance here that threads back to the worst self-admitted mistake of Cooper's life, which was getting together with Caroline, the wife of Cooper's former partner, Windom Earle. It says, without stepping too far into profiling, my feeling is that this relates directly to Cooper's... Oh, sorry, I'm jumping ahead here. Basically, Tamara thinks that Cooper suffers from white knight syndrome, which is the irresistible urge to rescue every damsel in distress he comes across. Then she goes on to saying, without stepping too far into profiling, my feeling is that this relates directly to Cooper's troubled relationship with his own mother. So let's talk about this briefly. This is a new element brought in, Cooper's white knight syndrome. Now, I can go back and look at the original series and say, well, he went and rescued Audrey. Obviously, he was with Caroline. He went to go save Annie. So yeah, I guess, Lynch and Frost look back on that and go like, well, he has white knight syndrome. He's always trying to save these girls. But, and I understand you can look at it that way, but I don't. I mean, I Cooper is a good guy. I mean, what is he supposed to do? Just let Annie just go with Earl into the Black Lodge? I mean, he's kind of the hero of the series. That's what we want heroes to do, is go save the person. It's also Annie, the woman that he's dating at the moment. So we have an investment there. Audrey, we love Audrey. She's getting shot up with heroin at One Eye Jack's. We want Cooper and Sheriff Truman and Hawk and everybody to go get her. When Cooper says to Sheriff Truman, like, let's go get Audrey, I mean, you get excited, like, yes, let's go get her. We're not like, oh, Cooper, you and your white knight syndrome.
Yeah. Well, but yeah, the wording here is very strong, like the irresistible urge to rescue every damsel in distress. You're right. He's a hero. He's a good guy. White knight is far too extreme for what he is.
Exactly. And that's also his job. He's a police officer.
Yeah.
He kind of has to protect and serve.
Yeah.
I mean, from interviews, we know that Lynch and Frost basically feel that Cooper going back in time to rescue Laura is an act of hubris, that he, is this part of this white knight syndrome that he thinks he can just rescue everybody. But you know what? If you have the ability to time travel, wouldn't you undo something that caused a lot of people pain and suffering and get rid of that Garmonbosia?
Exactly. Yeah.
How is that? Look, I understand you can look at it as white knight syndrome, but I look at it as just being heroic. I mean, if you have the ability to do that, I mean, I remember when he grabbed Laura's hand and said, we're going home. I was like applauding, because that's what you would do.
Yeah.
If you were in that position, are you just going to let that girl die again and let this just become one circular thing. No, you're gonna rewrite history.
And two, I mean, this is, for Laura, for example, this is the girl that he's he's only in any of these predicaments because of her. And that's who he's been stuck in a lodge for 25 years, seeing every once in a while, hearing about probably constantly. Um, that's not white knight syndrome like, oh, Laura, this is life. This is a specific incident where he was doing what was best for everybody. So, and the irresistible urge part, that's like he can't control it, but Cooper is very much in control of what he's doing. That's just his nature. He's got a good nature.
Okay, you want to talk white knight syndrome? Let's talk about James Hurley trying to save Evelyn Marsh.
That is a great example.
That is white knight syndrome. Even though I love James Hurley, even though a lot of people don't, I do love the character of James Hurley, and I
Yeah.
think he's always trying to do good.
Yes.
However, that is his downfall, is always trying to save women that maybe don't want to be saved or are using him.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Cooper is not that person.
Yeah.
And it really seems to be that Lynch and Frost, for whatever reasons, maybe because they're so tired of hearing about Agent Cooper for 25 years, that it seems like they kind of went out of their way in written form here with Frost and in the show itself, especially in part 17 and 18, to take Cooper down a few pegs and not make him that perfect hero. I mean, I remember in the series when Audrey says, "Hey, there's only one problem with you. You're perfect." Cooper isn't like, "Yes, I am." He has a look of contemplation on his face. He he doesn't believe what Audrey says to him. Like if she says to him, you know what, there's only one problem with you. You're perfect, and he's like, "Okay, Audrey, it's a deal."
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? It's not that at all. It's if she only knew that I slept with my partner's wife. He's out to kill me. It's all my fault. You know,
Mm-hmm.
she wouldn't think of me as perfect anymore, but I'm not going to trouble her. She's young. She's got her whole life in front of her. You know, let her walk out. And that's the look of contemplation on his face. And I honestly don't know how I feel about this idea of trying to make Cooper like kind of like a jerk now, where it's like he's only doing this because he has this, you know, condition and not just because he was trying to do the right thing. And I know a lot of people at the end of season 3 was like, "Oh, see, Cooper failed. You know, he got Laura, but they're trapped in some alternate world. It's ridiculous, and and he failed." I look at it and I go, "What are you talking about? He failed. He succeeded. He saved Laura. The world is now different, sure, but by undoing Laura's murder, he undid a lot of horrible things." Case in point, Mark Frost says today that Madeline Ferguson's still alive. Well, of course she's still alive because obviously she came to town because Laura had died. If Laura didn't die, Madeline wouldn't have been killed. So things like that. I don't know. So I'm kind of torn on this. It's like I see the information presented to me. I can see how Lynch and Frost come to these conclusions, but I think they're looking at it from a very weary and pessimistic point of view. I don't know. Maybe I'm just a hopeful, optimistic person. I'm just like, yes, I see where you're coming from, but you're kind of being that the glass is half full kind of guy, or half empty kind of guy. And I'm the opposite. I don't know. I don't. I mean, does this make any sense to you? What I'm saying?
It does. I'm kind of just, waiting for what you're saying next. Yeah, I mean, I think by the time 17, just to talk about the show itself for a second, I think by the time that 17 and 18 had rolled around and the kind of the trauma that we experienced with 17, um, by 18, there was this kind of defeated attitude that we all kind of had, like, what is actually happening here? We don't have context for this. Things are so different. And Cooper, who always saves the day, is walking around and he doesn't even know what year it is. It's disheartening. So I think where was I going with this? Where was I going with this?
Well, I'm just saying that,
What
like,
year is it?
yeah, what year is it? I mean, I'm not upset by that scene. That's fine. I mean, a hero can be confused in the moment. I'm saying when they're going around saying it was hubris of him to even think that he could go and save Laura Palmer, that's the white knight syndrome. I'm like, listen,
No.
if you're
Yeah.
Agent Cooper and you have these abilities now, you're going to apply those abilities and try to do right.
Yeah.
That's not hubris. That's trying to do the right thing.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right.
No, I agree.
I don't know. I just think that they're looking at it from a different perspective than I think the fans want it to be looked at. And I don't know if that's just the fans being silly and like not wanting to see the truth. Or I personally think that Lynch and Frost are trying to impose some truth there that might be there a little bit, but they're amplifying it and now making it the key thing about Cooper, as opposed to maybe a small element of his complex personality. Now they're making it the driving force of Agent Cooper. And that's what I'm kind of pushing against. Like, listen, that might be an element of him, but that's not the driving force. Agent Cooper only exists to, save these women from their fates. I don't believe that for a second.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Moving on. All right. So then that's basically it for the Annie Blackburn chapter. They barely don't even mention Annie in her own chapter. Mm-hmm. So off we go to the Windom Earle chapter. And this gets into, Windom Earle's history, going to school, becoming a chess grandmaster at the age of 14, going to the University of Pennsylvania at 16, joining the FBI. And what's interesting is that he says that, he goes to Quantico, which is where the FBI is. And this part, let's see if you get this, Mandy. She says, Windom Earle's subsequent partnership with you, Chief, as the founding member of the Bureau's Blue Rose Group, needs, I'm sure, no detailing here. Funny that they never mentioned his name once in that meeting with Tammy.
And that was such a, like, everybody was saying that after that episode aired, it's like, Windom Earle was part of this. He had to have been.
Now, some people say, no, he was part of the Project Blue Book thing. Okay, fine. But now this is saying that he's one of the founding members of the Blue Rose Task Force. And I understand that he may have been a crazy person. However, for her to know Windom Earle means that they had to have briefed her on him prior. So then why keep his name out of that initiation?
Yeah, exactly.
Does that make any sense to you? Besides just the fact is, okay, we just want to sweep away our garbage here. Listen, Earl is a crazy person, but something tells me that Gordon Cole still would have respected him, what he in his law enforcement prior to all the craziness. They obviously had a lot of respect for the guy.
Well, of course, and Cooper even talks about him too, about how his mind was sharp like a diamond, like that he was a brilliant mind. He was an incredible agent. So, and he didn't go crazy until long after.
Right. Yeah, so that's a bizarre thing there.
Mm-hmm.
Then it says, it says basically that the narrative revolving around Dale Cooper and Windom Earle may be familiar to you. She's referring to Gordon Cole, because of Cooper's own words on the subject from his daily tapes to Diane, or rather, Diane's transcripts of the tapes.
That
However,
was interesting.
hang on though. It then goes on to say that I, Tamar Preston, have concluded that the tapes and transcripts have been heavily redacted and modified. It's safe to say that, quote unquote, Diane's motivations for doing so at this point are well known to us and cannot be considered a consistently reliable source. Okay, Gordon Cole, Diane, had these tapes prior to Diane becoming the Tulpa.
Well, that was my question. This here, that makes us question how long she actually was a Tulpa.
And how long did Diane? Well, no, because doesn't Diane say in the series again? My dates might be a little fuzzy here. Doesn't she say that he shows up like a couple of years later at her apartment, and that's when the change happened? So we're talking 2 years after the Black Lodge incident, because he says he disappeared, and then he turned up several months later or like a couple of years later. It's something like that.
Well, yeah, and I don't think she hadn't quit the bureau right after Cooper had disappeared either.
Right. But I'm not thinking that she was a Tulpa then. She didn't become a Tulpa until after the Mr. C stuff happened.
Well, yeah, Mr. C is who made her a Tulpa.
But even
apparently,
if she came back and started redacting stuff, Gordon would have had this information long before, because this is detailing the Windom Earle relationship. You see what I'm getting at? There's just like, he's trying to make us question whether Tulpa Diane made all these changes, but according to our timeline that we have, she wasn't the Tulpa at this point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's nothing to suggest that regular Diane or real Diane in the late 70s, early 80s would be screwing around with tapes and transcripts and stuff.
Yeah, because I don't believe for one instance that then that would mean that in the original series, the Diane he's talking to is already a Tulpa. No.
And that she's not relaying information properly. Or, I mean, these people have seen people disappear in front of their eyes. They're well aware of the supernatural. The incident in the hotel with Philip and Gordon and that lady, what was her name? The first Tulpa. I mean, they have an eye for this stuff. So I don't think Diane would be able to have a long-standing career with the FBI as a Tulpa doing all this stuff.
And let's just break it down and get real here. How long did it take Gordon and Albert to figure out there was something wrong with Diane in this series? 2 days? It was pretty fast. I don't think that
it was the first day, actually, because they went to her apartment. They got on the plane to Buckhorn.
Right.
And as soon as he held her, he was like, whoa, like he knew.
Well, there was that. But what I'm saying, though, is so you're expecting me to believe that for 10 years in the FBI, no one knew that she was a fake when they figured this out like that?
Yeah.
Come on. All right. Anyway, I do like the fact that we get a little bit more background on Windom Earle, saying that it wasn't Cooper and Caroline that just fell in love, that he kind of was pushing them to fall in love. He kept arranging situations for them to kind of casually show up and, hey, I didn't know you were going to be here. And Tamaris refers to him as a deranged, vengeful Cupid.
Mm-hmm.
And basically it seems like that Earle only did this because he believed that Caroline had a thing for Cooper and he for her. So he arranged situations so that his theory would be proved right. He kind of made it happen himself. That's kind of...
Yeah, that's what she's saying. But it's like, what would have triggered Windom to become that deranged to begin with. Like there's no backstory of
Well,
like a turning point.
he's already committing murders that Caroline witnessed. Remember, that's why Cooper and was assigned to protect her. And he says
that he believed Windom committed himself, right?
Right. So there's that. But I think it's funny that like when Windom tells Annie when he's taking her to the Black Lodge, she says, "Why are you doing this?" And he goes, "You know, I was they say what? Why are you doing this? Same thing happened when he fell in love with my wife, you know." And of course, Annie's probably thinking, "What the hell is he talking about? Whose wife did Cooper fall in love with?" Oh my God, I'm in the middle of some bromance gone wrong here. Anyway, so he goes, "I took the boy right to the edge that time." So obviously, Earle is playing sort of like puppet master here a little bit, which is interesting because it seemed like that Cooper and Caroline just kind of fell in love, and maybe from Cooper's perspective, it was that, but from Earle's perspective, he kind of manufactured it to happen, which is a new way of looking at it. But it's not a new way so much that I have to reevaluate everything in my head. Like it's just kind of like, oh, okay, from Earle's perspective, he kind of was doing this. So,
okay.
Anything you want to add before we move on?
No, I was just reading this part that says that Windom Earle didn't count on the fact that Agent Cooper had by this time privately realized that Earle himself was the serial killer that they had been chasing all along. And Caroline, it seems, reached the same conclusion also on her own and confirmed it when she and Cooper finally examined the facts together.
Right. But here, Tamara kind of, she kind of doubles down here on the white knight syndrome, where she says, "Am I being too harsh on Agent Cooper here? I'm open to suggestions, so please let me know if you feel that's the case. Notwithstanding its importance, I believe Cooper's obsession with Laura Palmer's case harbors echoes of this tendency." And what she's referring to is that she says, Cooper's on record, well, tape anyway, confirming that this experience of Earle and Caroline represented the most difficult lesson of his life and admirably took it to heart. But that's not quite the same thing as entirely purging an ingrained impulse to save a troubled woman from herself. I'm telling you, it's like I get what they're trying to do, and I'm not sure if I'm okay with this. The idea of just turning Cooper into making us go, oh God, he's just another self-centered white man who just wants to just save the day, and regardless of anyone else's, ideas or I don't know. You know what I mean?
I do. It's my brain's all scrambled about this right now.
My brain's scrambled. I'm barely forming coherent sentences, I feel like, in this video. But I mean, I want to know, as a Twin Peaks, enthusiast here, how am I supposed to feel about this? I guess you can just feel however you want, but I'm just saying, like, I don't want to just think that the guy that a character in, it was a TV series. I understand that, but a character in a TV series that I greatly admired, that I thought had a lot of great qualities. Looking back 25 years, I don't want to be like, what a bunch of horse crap. You're just full of it. I don't know. I don't. Cooper didn't have a mean bone in his body. And now they want me to look at him and kind of just throw all my good thoughts and memories about him under the bus and just be like, no, he's just, it's kind of like, this is an extreme example, an absolute extreme example. But I almost feel like Frost and Lynch want to do with Cooper. Okay, this is extreme. Okay, just saying. But I have to be extreme to make this point. I think Lynch and Frost are treating Agent Cooper and want us to feel about Agent Cooper the way the public now does about Bill Cosby. That for years we thought of him as this, America's dad. And now we can't even look at the Cosby Show anymore because of all the new stuff and stories that have come out. I almost think that Lynch and Frost, in eliminating Laura from being dead, they want us to read this book, watch the new series, and now look back on seasons 1 and 2 and be like, Agent Cooper wasn't that great after all. And I don't want that to be the case.
I hate everything you just said. You know what I like? But I completely understand it too. And you're right, if that is what they're doing, which I don't know if I believe, but I don't know what to believe reading this book. Like, it's a little bit odd, but that would be really awful. Like, you can only have one major character shift with this thing. You brought Laura back. You saved her. She isn't dead anymore. She's just gone missing. Spoiler alert for those who haven't finished the book. You can't go and make Cooper just some ordinary schlub who was okay sometimes, but pretty self-serving and kind of a jerk the other times. You can't do that. That's not fair, right?
I really do think. I think they really like Agent Cooper, but I think they're tired of Agent Cooper. And I think that, I mean, some people have even, listen, I really enjoyed the Dougie character. I thought it was kind of funny, and I loved Kyle's performance as that character.
Eventually, yes.
No, but even at the time, I was I just kind of said, I'm along for the ride, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And I enjoyed watching Kyle's performance in those scenes.
Very much, yeah.
That being said, the idea of, now I understand they didn't have a lot of story in this story for Cooper to do, so they knew they had to keep Dougie locked in there for, episode 3 to episode 15. But I mean, it is kind of a perverse thing to do, right? To take your hero of your show and turn him, for all practices, into like a near vegetable for 2/3 of the new season. While I find that a really interesting take on things, and you were able to kind of look at it from a different perspective, I think I was taking the optimistic point of view. I think that some other people looked at it and said, no, this looks like they're making fun of Agent Cooper. Like, they just were like, you know what? We don't even like Agent Cooper. We're just going to put him in a chair eating chocolate cake, and you're going to just sit there and love it because you're Twin Peaks fans.
But what's the motivation for that? Why would they do that?
Well, from that perspective, you could say that they are tired of hearing people saying to them, when's Agent Cooper coming back? Are you going to make another Twin Peaks? And they're just like, we're tired of this. So they said, okay, we're going to come back and do Twin Peaks, but we're not really going to do Twin Peaks. We're going to do this other thing. However, I like this other thing because I thought that what they did was they made Twin Peaks a much broader, more, they pushed, they made it bigger than it was just in this little town. I like that. Okay.
Yes.
To me, I thought that was a very cool thing to do. That being said, I understand where other people are coming from, saying, hey, it looks like they just don't like the character at all. And then even when he did come back, they didn't even let him say hi to everybody at the sheriff's station. They just, sent him down the dark hallway, and then he's having sex.
Yeah, he was in and out of
He's
there.
having sex with Diane as Linda, and then next thing you know, he rescues Laura Palmer, and now he's trapped in an alternate dimension. And good night, everybody. And so I think some people may have a point that they don't like the character. I still look at it and I go, well, I see optimistic things in this thing. I can write it all the way through. I can make that case for myself that this is still a very positive look at Agent Cooper. But with this book and with the way people have spoken about the last 2 episodes, I'm starting to wonder, not me myself, but I'm starting to wonder if the creators themselves are tired of the character and they wanted to not have it just be Agent Cooper. They wanted to push it to another thing. It's kind of like, okay, Back to the Future. Okay. In Back to the Future, Marty goes back, and spoiler alert, his parents aren't going to get together, and he manages to get them together, and he comes back, right? And he's going to be born. His brother's going to be born. His sister's going to be born. This is the Back to the Future thing, right? But then when you get to Back to the Future Part 2, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, Marty has what are you, chicken? And all of a sudden Marty has this issue with people calling him chicken. And this follows into the third film because 2 and 3 were supposed to be like one giant movie. That element is not in Back to the Future 1 at all. It's only brought in Back to the Future 2. I think that's what they're doing here. In a way, it's like we had Agent Cooper the way we know him in seasons 1 and 2, and slightly in Fire Walk with Me because he was a different, I mean, he was a little different in that movie. It mostly stemmed from Kyle not wanting to be there. But all right. But this new series is Back to the Future 2. All of a sudden, they're starting to give Cooper these character traits that may have been there a little bit, but again, they weren't the main focus of him. Now they're making it the main focus, where they're making us, in a way, I think, want us to go back and rewatch season 1 and 2 and be like, God, what a naive dweeb. He thought he could just come into town, save everybody, and just, be the White Knight. I don't look at it that way at all. But I get from the vibe of this book, especially Tamara's insistence that this is his issue. And she's the newest recruit into the Blue Rose Task Force. So Gordon Cole definitely likes her input. I don't know. I don't know what to do with this information. I mean, I know everything's up to your interpretation, but it seems like they're really trying to push me into not liking Agent Cooper anymore, or at least looking at him as a more negative thing. And you have no comment on that.
I have no comment on it. But what you say actually it does make sense. I'm just a little angry about it.
But see, I'm not angry because there's still enough there that I can see what I want to see in it.
Of course. I mean, we're going to carry these people with us the way that we want to, really, because that's what everybody does. And we can completely forget this book even exists if we want to. We can forget the things that are being told to us in this book, and we can sit and watch and just kind of focus on the familiar.
I love this book. I want to make it very clear. I love this book. What I don't like, the only things I don't like are when it doesn't feel like Tamara Preston is writing this. It feels like Mark Frost is writing Tamara Preston writing this. This White Knight syndrome thing, this isn't something that Tamara Preston comes up with. This is something that Mark Frost thinks about after 25 years, looks back on it, and we know he's very outspoken about a lot of things, right? So politically on Twitter, and that's awesome. But this White Knight syndrome is definitely something that I feel like, he's very, he throws in some Donald Trump jokes and stuff like, what I mean? He's very angry at the white middle class right now for voting Donald Trump in there. And so I think that Agent Cooper gets, and then obviously the white middle class, in his mind, definitely, went after Barack Obama and all this stuff. You know what I mean? So I think that he's just very angry right now about certain things. We know that about, like, obviously we see a lot of that in the economic things in the show, right? With everyone living in the mobile homes. And I just think that he's just like, you know what? I'm not going to have another perfect white hero come in and save the day. I'm going to make him screwed up because he's got these issues now. And that's the thing. It's like, I don't mind bringing in new elements and making us think in interesting ways about a character, but don't completely rewrite him where now I have to look at seasons 1 and 2 through a new lens and not like him anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't just say, okay, well, Cooper's this, and then he becomes this. Like, let's say he established a White Knight syndrome in this new series. Okay, I'm okay with that.
Sure, yeah.
What I don't like, though, is that if they now eliminated seasons 1 and 2 because Laura didn't die, then obviously if you go back and watch it, you're supposed to go back and watch it with the idea that Cooper always had this problem. And like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'm probably driving people crazy talking about this, but to me, I find this really interesting and fascinating, especially from a writer's perspective. Like, you have control of these characters, and this is what you choose to do with them.
Mm-hmm.
If the Final Dossier is the final thing in Twin Peaks, which I don't believe, but let's say it is, then the Final Dossier is telling us that our final thoughts on Agent Cooper is that he had issues and he wasn't the good guy we wanted him to be. And that's a little sad.
Yeah.
So, all right, moving on.
Yeah, let's move past this. It's great thoughts, and I hope that actually starts a lot of discussions. And I will say too, I also love this book, but when you pick it apart or go through it, it's you do start to see some inconsistencies and some things that kind of make you scratch your head a little bit. So
Now, that all that being said, Tamara does kind of pull it back in the next paragraph by saying, well, first she says, let me bring this home. Was this established trait a factor in Cooper's attraction to Annie Blackburn? And then she pulls back and she says, no, it's possible that what drew him to Annie was something much purer and simpler. The fact that they both endured and survived vicious assaults by dangerous criminals against the core of their being. Okay. Thank you, Tamara, for actually saying something sweet about these two characters, as opposed to, Annie was just a damsel in distress, and Cooper wanted to save the day.
mm-hmm.
Yawn.
Yeah.
And let's see here. Okay, so that, and then, it says, Earle went away into a federal max security facility, but he engineered a daring escape and vanished without a trace. And there it is. That brings us to the next chapter, back in Twin Peaks. All right, so this chapter begins with it saying that Earle had been in Twin Peaks for more than a month before Norma encouraged Annie Blackburn to enter the local beauty contest known as the Miss Twin Peaks pageant. So that means that Windom Earle was in town at the time of Laura Palmer's death. And that is why
he might have been there before she even died.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And that is why when I first saw Fire Walk with Me, and that scene with Leland is driving with Laura, and the one-armed man comes up behind them in the truck. When I first saw that truck driving erratically on the road behind them in the theater, I was 16 years old. I remember going, "It's Windom Earle!"
Wow.
Because it made sense that he was already in town, right? And the way the car was driving erratically, you're not thinking one-armed man. I was thinking it's Windom Earle, like he stole Pete's truck again or something, And he was just driving around all crazy. And then obviously it's the one-armed man. So it wasn't that. But I thought, oh my God, what an Easter egg that is, right? To have Windom Earle just right. If it had just been Windom Earle that just drove right past them all crazy, that would have been like awesome. Like, oh my God, there he is, Kenneth Welsh driving past them. That would have been great. Okay. So, I like how Tamara says that Annie wowed the judges at the Miss Twin Peaks contest, and she says a low bar, admittedly. I made the comment in a previous video that she kind of made a dig at Lana getting it after Annie because the fact that the mayor was one of the judges, but she doesn't make a mention that Norma was one of the judges and she's her sister.
Oh yeah, right. Jeez.
But it's funny how Tamara doesn't notice that. But she notices the other thing. All right, so then it says that after she won, Earle kidnapped Annie and made off with her undetected, and that Cooper was in pursuit. And it says Earle took her to a still to this day undiscovered location somewhere in the Ghostwood National Forest. Says Earle's objective seems crystal clear. With Annie in hand, he hoped to draw Cooper to him and finish the job he begun in Pittsburgh. And that Cooper, quote unquote, went alone and disappeared. and she says the difficulty is I don't know what Sheriff Truman means by saying either description: went and where and disappeared how. She then goes on to say that Windom Earle was never seen again. No trace of him, dead or alive, ever turned up in those woods or elsewhere. They said that Cooper and Annie were discovered in a nearby clearing. Deputies rushed Annie to a hospital. They then took Cooper back to the room at the Great Northern, where Doc Hayward checked him out and pronounced him healthy, but in need of rest. And Cooper spent the remainder of that day recovering at the hotel. Let me repeat this. Cooper spent the remainder of that day recovering at the hotel. Now, if you go to the Horns and Haywards chapter, it says that Cooper spent the day and night in the hospital after the mirror incident. So again, we're getting conflicted things. So why isn't Tamara calling this out? That's what I don't understand. Is she's noticing all these details about it, but she's not calling out the fact that Cooper spent the day in the hotel. But in the previous chapter, when she completely analyzed Doc Hayward's report from Ben Horn, she didn't notice that. Well, now I'm saying that Cooper spent the day and night in the hospital.
Mm-hmm.
I'm confused.
Yeah. And even at the beginning of this chapter too, she says Earle took her to a still to this day undiscovered location somewhere in the Ghostwood National Forest.
Mm-hmm.
A whole bunch of people know where that is. A bunch of people know where Glastonbury Grove is. Harry sat outside of Glastonbury Grove for 12 hours. And that's where Annie and Cooper were ejected from too.
I'd like to think that she's referring to the Black Lodge itself. I'm trying to give her a little benefit of the doubt.
Okay.
She can't be that airheaded.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, it would have been great if. I was hoping in part 2 of this new series when Hawk goes up there to Glastonbury Grove. Now, a lot of people seem to think that he saw the red curtains. I don't believe he saw the red curtains. I think that was just the show trying to express to us the curtains are there, but they're not there. I don't think that Hawk saw the red curtains and was like, all right, I'm out of here. Because I think if he saw red curtains, he would have just been drawn in and gone in.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that he wouldn't have just been like, oh, well, that's pretty, and then leave. He would have been proactive because that's what he would have been looking for anyway. Because we all know that Hawk knows what he's looking for. Do they show the red drapes there when he gets there?
Yes. Well, they don't just like appear like full on. They kind of just come in out of the darkness, like waving, you know.
Well, and it's like when they appear in front of Mr. C's car before he starts vomiting.
Yeah, but those came like full on. These are kind of like just kind of there but not there.
Okay.
And I thought it was just the show letting us know, oh, the drapes are still there, Glastonbury Grove, but Hawk is just kind of spooked out by the area and just kind of leaves.
Well, Hawk doesn't get spooked out by supernatural things.
I know. I'm trying to,
but I know.
I'm just trying to make an excuse why he just turned around and never mentioned the place again.
Yeah, right.
In the whole
and really, and if it was for our benefit to show like, oh, that's where the Black Lodge is or where the entrance was. I mean, we're well aware of Glastonbury Grove.
Yes, but I think it's been 25 years. The same thing with the doppelganger saying in front of the mirror, "Are you still with me?" Because there's a lot of dumb people out there in the world too that don't believe that Bob was still inside the doppelganger. I was saying from the very beginning, Bob's inside the doppelganger, and they're all, "It's been 25 years. Bob's taken off." No. And even though it's been 25 years later, you can't have something that huge happen off screen where Bob exited the doppelganger off screen. No. And people would write into me, "You're full of it. Bob's not with him." And then all of a sudden they had to literally say to the idiots, "I'm with you." So
yeah.
Anyway.
And in part 8 too, Bob was shown, but he didn't actually exit. you know, and everyone was like, oh yeah, he's out of him now. He's out of him. No, we didn't see the bubble leave.
Okay, here's the thing though. I will agree with that. I did believe after part 8 that Bob wasn't inside of him.
Why?
Because if you say, are you still with me? And he says, I am. Then there has to be a moment where he's not with him. Because you've already established he's with him now. So then we need to see him what he's like without Bob inside of him. So I thought after 8, it was just a doppelganger. But then at the end, obviously, we discovered it wasn't that. So there it is. But that's that image of the woodsman in part 8 pulling out Bob with that smile. Yeah, that's pretty scary stuff.
It's like the scariest thing ever. It was terrifying. With the music, oh my gosh.
And with the near, even though it wasn't black and white, it still was in the dark. So it very much was black and white. And it was so like pixelated on my broadcast that I couldn't really see it clearly. So I got closer to the TV and all of a sudden that smile came out in that ball. Oh. And I was like, oh my goodness. I just, you know, that's terrible. Terrifying.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it goes on to say that Annie Blackburn spent one day in the hospital during which she appeared relatively unaffected. Then the next morning, hospital staff found her in an abject catatonic state. Okay, so that's what that is the scene in The Missing Pieces when the nurse is visiting her at 3:00 in the morning. If you notice, when they cut that scene out of The Missing Pieces and you have the clock there, that's the same clock that's used in the when Laura goes to see James inside the locker room, or like the boiler room, whatever.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so it's like, okay, we're not going to use that scene, so move the clock to this room.
Oh, jeez.
Anyway, so obviously that's when the nurse takes the Alcave ring from her. Says Annie was like this for the next 10 days. She got a little bit better, but she stopped talking. She was able to sit up and walk around, but she was passive, incompliant, serene. 2 months later, man, they must have excellent health coverage. 2 months later, Norma was able to move Annie out of the hospital and back to her house. And Vivian, obviously the Annie's real mom and Norma's stepmom, never answered Norma's calls about Annie. So wonderful woman there, which obviously explains why Tamara is so angry at her. Says 1 year to the day after Annie had been found in the woods, obviously after the Black Lodge incident, Norma came home to find her slumped in bed in a pool of her own blood. She'd slit her wrists again with the shards of a shattered glass. They rushed her to the hospital. She was fine. Annie never gave the slightest indication that she knew what she had done to herself. And then she was, okay, it says, as far as anyone can remember, she did say one sentence the next morning in the hospital. As far as anyone could remember, it was the only thing she had said since the day they found her in the woods. Nobody had asked her anything, but out of nowhere, she says, I'm fine. They noted that on the chart of 8:38 a.m. Says that Annie's condition did not improve. Norma realized that she needed, round-the-clock care, so she had a fundraiser where Ben Horn was the major contributor, and Annie was transferred to a private psychiatric hospital. And she's been there ever since. Says that Tamara's visited the hospital recently and spent more than 2 hours sitting with her. She's still quite beautiful, her face unlined and youthful in appearance. She looks as if she's hardly aged a day. She sits alone and still every day, all day, without any need for or interest in external stimulation or activity. Every year, once a year, on the anniversary of that day that she was found in the woods, without prompting or responding to any inquiry directed her, at 8:38 in the morning, she will speak that same single sentence to no one in particular. I'm fine. Says it's highly doubtful her condition will ever change or improve. And she concludes, and so it seems, with an endless, was it ellipsis? Ellipsis rather than a period. Here is where we take our leave of the life's journey of Annie Blackburn. All right, well, there's a sad and tragic ending for you.
Okay, so you love the character of Annie. So
yeah,
how did you feel about what they've done with her here?
I'm one of two minds. One is it's, I know Frost is really trying to do a nice thing by letting her just kind of, she says in that canoe boat on her date with Cooper that she lives in her head mostly. So here she is living in her head mostly. And so Frost is painting a picture that she's okay, she's taken care of, and that every year she'll say, I'm fine, sort of, as an answer to how's Annie? How's Annie? I'm fine. I'm fine. I think there's a little bit more to that behind that, which hopefully I will be able to explore later in another venue, hopefully soon. But I think it's a nice ending, but it's also an easy ending.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of
That's
like that.
good. Yeah.
It's kind of like that Twilight Zone kind of ending where it's like things are good, things aren't so good, and here we are.
Mm-hmm.
We're just gonna leave her here and take another character. And while I feel like it's realistic in this world, and I agree with Mark Frost when he says that he wanted to take more of a realistic portrayal of a lot of these things and say, okay, if this really happened, this is kind of like the way it would go down, but like with Donna and her family and that type of thing. But when you have a book that's 160 pages long and so many characters kind of end up in similar states, it almost becomes like, oh, and here we are again. Ah, oh, and here we are again. So it kind of like each chapter is unto itself, I think works really, really well. When you put it together as a book, while I still think it works, I think it also is just, wow, that's a bummer. Wow, that's a bummer.
Yeah.
That's a bummer. And some people have even thrown this out there saying, you know, is Mark Frost really this harsh on the guy characters? Why does all the girls end up in psychiatric hospitals? It's an interesting critique. Just saying. That's an interesting way to look at it. You know, so I don't know. I mean, it's kind of an easy ending. It honestly is. But I'm okay with that for a variety of reasons, because it leaves options. Let's just say
Mm-hmm.
that. But yeah, so I mean, we covered the Double R Diner and Annie and Wyndham and Caroline and obviously Annie's ultimate fate here in these four chapters. Um, it's it's more in depth than anything we got in season 2 or season 3 about this family.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the information we do get, I like a lot of it. I question some of it just because of it makes you kind of think things in a different way, but not necessarily always in a good way, kind of like in a confusing way. I don't like the fact that it says that Annie was like 16 years old when she meets Cooper, but then a couple of pages later it says she was in her early 20s when she meets Cooper.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. And again, I know a lot of people will say this, oh, it's the different timelines that Cooper has created. I get that. And you know what, you can say that. And I could maybe get on board with that. My thing is when does that stop becoming an excuse?
Mm-hmm.
And when are we? It's kind of like with Stanley Kubrick. I love Stanley Kubrick, but if Stanley Kubrick had something, like I don't know, something wrong in the frame or something like that didn't match from something else, people are always saying, well, Stanley Kubrick, he was so meticulous about every little thing that if there's a problem in his film, it's because he meant it to be there. And maybe he did. I don't know. But the same thing goes with Lynch and Frost, right? It's like, how much are we willing to give them and say, whether we know the answer or not, how much are we going to allow them to make constant, quote unquote errors or mistakes and have us write it off as being like, well, they know what they're doing. And this is everything's purposeful, everything's wonderful. I love the reader, uh, you know, where it allows you to be a part of this, really lets you engage with it because you're like, well, that's right, that's wrong, and it kind of this book brings so much joy, but at the same time, it brings so much like head scratchingness to it. So I don't know. Like I said, I love this book. I certainly love it more than the previous book. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah.
That being said, I'm trying to figure out like, why are there so many inconsistencies, sometimes numerous ones in the same chapter that listen, I'm not saying it negates something from 3 books back. I'm saying it negates something that's 2 pages before it. Right?
Yeah. So exactly.
That's where I'm at. And then some of them are like literally like, this is negating what this chapter says over here. So why isn't Tamara, who is now, I'm the archivist now, why isn't she saying, well, that doesn't match up to what I just wrote to you? Why isn't she calling herself out for writing this stuff? So I'm, like I said, while I love this book, I am a little bit confused as to why are they doing this and what are the ultimate intentions of just playing around with names and dates and this, like why are we turning Annie into a 16-year-old when she meets Cooper? Like, what is the purpose of that? And then what is the purpose of saying she's in her 20s just a couple pages later? I don't get that. Do you really want us to think for a couple pages that Agent Cooper is, a child molester? Is that what you want us to think?
Well, yeah, he wouldn't get with Audrey, so why would he get with Annie?
And I'm sorry, I don't know any convent that takes 15-year-olds in. Right?
I wouldn't know.
I know
yeah.
you're far from the convent life. I know that, Mandy, but I'm just saying.
Okay. That just didn't sound good at all. Excuse me.
I'm just saying.
This video is a disaster. Okay. Anyway, let's keep going.
What do you mean this video is a disaster?
No, I'm just joking. It's a lot of fun.
I'm merely saying that, you have to be of adult age to make a decision that big. You can't just be a 15-year-old and be like, I'm joining the convent.
Yeah.
So take that back. This video is a disaster.
It's not.
It's fine if the audience wants to say something like that, but not the co-host.
Sorry.
Oh my Lord.
This is great.
See, you're turning into Mark Frost on me. 5 minutes earlier, you're like, this is a lot of fun. Now you're like, it's a disaster. I'm like, oh my goodness. So anyway, all right. So what's your takeaway from these 4 chapters before we get into any more fun discussions here?
I don't know.
You're speechless again?
I'm kind of speechless again. When we first heard about Mark Frost doing a book, which was a couple of years ago, I guess, and that he was going to be exploring the lives of people from Twin Peaks over the last 25 years. That was really exciting. He could have done like a big thick novel of, kind of juicy stories about all these people. So the stories that they share in the Final Dossier, they're fine. They're very different. I wish that he would have spent more time on them and developed them more. You don't, like for Annie, for example, it's 1.5 pages. We've been waiting 25 years to find out how she's doing. And
well, I think they answer that, don't you think? I mean,
they do,
not in her chapter, but they answer another chapter.
Exactly. Like,
but, it's just, so what? We still get the answers.
I know, but it's not linear enough for me.
Okay, well, it's fine for me. I listen. You say I wish they were more in depth and spent more time. I think that he spends enough time on. I mean, like the Sheriff Truman chapter is literally like a page long, and yet I wouldn't change a thing. I think it's beautiful. The Log Ladies one is only like a page and a half long. Like, you don't need to have like 25 pages written about every character. But I just wish that there was consistency with the show.
Yeah,
that's all I'm saying. And a lot of, I mean, and there's so much consistency with the show and the book that you know that he knows it, right? And I understand that there's this alternate thing going on with the timeline, but the timeline doesn't change the fact that Annie's born in 1973, right?
Yeah.
I don't know. So things like that, right? I mean, when I'm discussing these 4 chapters, and that's what we're doing here, that's the peculiar thing, and then negating it just a couple of pages later. So I don't know. Like I said, this is a very, out of all the chapters, I think that these 4 together create a powerhouse of a story, but it does make you think things about Vivian, who I really could care less about her storyline, but okay. And then changing, Annie's whole situation to about a stepfather. So again, we're tying everything back into parental sexual abuse on a child. So that's almost saying that Cooper's falling in love with Annie because in a subconscious way, that's his redemption from Laura, like saving Laura. And it's like, I don't know about this.
Yeah.
So it pushes and pulls the story in exciting new ways and in ways that I don't know if it's successful, but it's interesting. I guess, I'm certainly not down on them. I'm just kind of flabbergasted by all this stuff I've mentioned earlier. So
yeah. It's quite it's like a brain teaser type thing. It's very, I don't know. I'm kind of speechless.
I am too. And I find that funny because I've been putting up a video or two about each chapter, for the last week or so, and having different people on and discussing them. And they're super fun to discuss, even if there's some little weird inconsistencies here and there. But these 4 together, wow, it really kind of, plays with the head.
Well, yeah, like even the Shelley chapter, bada bing, bada bang, we're done in like 30 minutes. And it was clear. It was a good story. We had a good discussion. And this one, we're just like, there's just so much happening here.
Yeah. So. And I don't want people going away saying, oh, we're just down on this book. Cause I'm not, I love this. I love this book. And believe it or not, Amazon finally sent my book today. So now I have 2 copies. Well, actually I have 3 if you count the Kindle. Actually 4 because I have the audiobook.
Oh my goodness.
So yeah, there you go. So I own this book 4 times, so I can't hate this book. I love this book.
Yeah.
I just would like answers in terms of like, why were certain choices made? That's all. I don't need to know the meaning of those choices. I just want to know why. And is Mark Frost actually creating notes as to what he has changed and what he has not changed? That's what I'm curious about. Like when he makes a change, like making Annie Blackburn 16 years old, is he writing that down? Because 2 pages later, she's in her early 20s. So
yeah,
again, is he like, okay, I'm going to write she's 16 because I don't think Twin Peaks fans know math. And then I'm going to make her in her early 20s again because Twin Peaks fans don't know math. And we'll see if anybody notices. Or is he just kind of writing like, you know what, 1973, that sounds good. Puts her at like almost 18. No, it doesn't. But all right. And I'm just curious, like what is going on there? Or is he just making stuff up? Like, I think she's in her early 20s. Heather Graham was in her early 20s. So, all right.
Yeah, sounds good, right?
Early 20s. Oh, what? But isn't his editor like reading this book going, excuse me, Mark, you said she was 16 2 pages earlier. It's part of the grand plan. Don't question it. Keep the mystery alive.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
I listen. I'm half teasing, and I'm half extremely perplexed. I don't know what to say. So probably should be smart that we end this video before we just go round and round in circles, and I suffer from white knight syndrome trying to rescue these chapters and have them make sense. So,
there you go.
Mandy, I want to thank you so much for joining me tonight on this epic discussion of the Vivian, Norma, Annie, Windom, Caroline saga.
Yes, my pleasure. Sorry, I wasn't. Sorry, most of it was me going. I don't know, but that's the fun of this, right?
I don't know if fun is the word, because this is sort of like self-torture in some ways. But it is a blast to kind of try to sort these thoughts out with you without any cuts or edits in front of a live YouTube audience. You know, usually, you know, videos, you know, there's a reason why people edit on YouTube. And I love just putting up these kind of, you know, just full on conversations up there and let people say what they think. You know, you agree or disagree, you know? So anyway, all right, guys. Well, thank you so much for joining this discussion. Please leave your comments below. If you like the video, please like it and share them. I really appreciate all your love and support. Yeah, these were pretty wild chapters, so I'm anxious to hear what your thoughts are. We will return later this week with the final 3 chapters of the book, Major Briggs, Today, and Final Thoughts. So I'm looking forward to discussing those as well. So in the meantime, guys, you take it easy. Have a great night, and we will see you soon. Take care. Bye.